Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Two Fish at the Table Poker Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Legend of Ben on Poker Stars.
And I'm one of your hosts, East Coast Sam. And today we're going to be talking about the 2013 WSOP Europe event, as well as several other events in Asia Pacific. But before we get into old poker news, we're going to be talking about the modern developments in the Robby Lew case, which if you've clicked on this video, I think you know everything about the case. So I think, Ben, we should just sort of dive into our thoughts here. I mean, I was definitely in the camp of she wasn't cheating. I just feel like the Jack forehand was, people play weird hands all the time, right? I mean, that was my feeling about it. But Hustlers Casino has just come out with an announcement that an employee was caught stealing $15,000 in chips from Robby Lew's stack while she was away from the table, and that apparently this employee was involved with the production, helped with the graphics, helped with a lot of other aspects behind the scenes, and also has like a criminal history or something. I'm not quite sure what his felonies are, but this development definitely has changed my thoughts on it. But Ben, I figure, why don't you offer your thoughts and we can dive into it more.
Well, it's funny because my thought process on this whole situation really kind of followed this odd narrative that I was influenced by a couple of the poker professionals' takes on the situation. Mm-hmm. It was funny because my first exposure was I saw an article on pokernews.com. Then I watched Daniel Negreanu's podcast talking about their take on the situation, how they were pretty much in the camp of it wasn't cheating. It was like they put like 10% odds on that being the case, and I saw their point. I was definitely on board, and then I watched the hand itself, and I thought, I mean, just the way that Robby Lew was acting just didn't seem like how I thought she would be handling herself at the table. Like just literally how she spoke, her body language, her manner of conduct at the table. So I was I guess a bit more towards maybe something was off there, and then I watched the Doug Polk video, his first one on. He thought that she was cheating 100%. And it's funny, I was kind of a victim of the moment. Like I was leaning towards Negreanu believing, yeah, she didn't cheat. And Doug Polk was in the opposite of like, yeah, maybe he's right. But really, I kind of sticking to my guns here, not being influenced by other people's opinions. I don't think she cheated. I mean, it's funny because it really kind of felt like if I was in her chair, I would feel like maybe Garrett had like a combo draw, but like undercards to the jack. So it's kind of like one of those weird spots where if it was just like play money, maybe I somehow sometimes will convince myself to call. Obviously, with real money, it's a whole different story. But
yeah,
so I can kind of defend the poker logic to a small degree. But then there were so many other like conspiracy details that pop up, like the chair vibrating, or she played hands like this prior, or her stake she had played in past game. All these other deals kind of cloud the mind a bit. But if you just kind of focus on the evidence on the screen in front of you, I don't think she cheated. And obviously someone stealing $15,000 is very serious. It's very strange that would happen in a very, it's not televised, but it's a, broadcasted situation. And so, and I'm glad he got caught. If, it's a crime, I want them to be caught, obviously, if it's illegal. And obviously the fallout from this whole Robby versus Garrett situation is maybe a heads up match, maybe a lie detector test, all this crazy stuff. Obviously, the story is still developing. We're kind of in the middle of the narrative here, but I'm with you that I don't believe she cheated. And the poker world is, it's a very murky community sometimes. And people talk about the olden days, guns and robberies and all this crazy stuff can happen. And so maybe that's why people, believe in this sort of idea of someone was cheating like this nowadays, but I don't think she cheated. And but I'm fully open to hearing more details and getting all the facts. And whenever it gets found, I'll believe in the evidence.
Yeah, I mean, looking at the hand itself, I mean, if you just take that hand by itself, off of her body language and off of the way she played the hand, I don't feel like she cheated. I don't feel like off of that particular hand that she cheated, because it's a terrible spot for her to be cheating. I mean, when you think about it either way, if you're cheating, it's a bad play to be calling with the jack high. Garrett is still drawing very, very live. I mean, why do that there? Why not wait for a more inconspicuous spot when you can cheat? And reading over her hand histories and all that, it really doesn't seem like there's too many suspicious hands there. I didn't notice anything super suspicious. I have not seen the streams all the way through, by the way. I'm just talking about the hand histories that I've read online. I really don't notice any sort of pattern of behavior. I mean, this whole vibrating chair thing, I think it's silly that she would have a device on her that would cause her entire body to vibrate as well as her chair. I mean, if it's a phone, a vibrating phone, like on vibration mode, it would make noise. I mean, it's very conspicuous that her whole body shifts. And, the fact that she put her cards forward and said, like, I'm going to fold, and the vibrating stopped, that to me suggests that she was thinking. And, you sort of, you stim, you sort of move around when you're trying to think.
Yeah.
That to me suggests more has to do with that than anything else. But yeah, I mean, this new development has really, it's just very odd that she wouldn't press charges against this guy, and this guy was in charge of all the graphics. So again, I mean, I'd say that, like, the evidence in front of me, I feel like she didn't cheat, but I'm not gonna say for 100% certainty that she did cheat or didn't cheat, excuse me. I'm gonna wait for all the facts to come out. This investigation is ongoing. I mean, the thing about a polygraph test is, they're not admissible in court for a reason. They're really just confession machines. If you're anxious about the question and the situation, you're gonna fail a polygraph. I mean, so I don't really buy that angle, but they're gonna be reviewing the footage. Garrett said 100% that Hustler wasn't involved in this, which I don't know why he would say something like that. She had to have had somebody on the inside helping her out if she did cheat. I mean, I don't know. We'll find out as time goes on. I'm not gonna say. The evidence right now, even with this 15K thing, leads me to think that she didn't cheat, but I can't say, I wasn't as sure as, I'm not as sure now as I was before. I mean, I don't know. You can tell from the way I'm talking, like, I'm just very hesitant. She's also said that she'll sue the people who's accused her of cheating. So I just want to say, yeah.
And, as far as, a victim or a victimless crime, I mean, Garrett got the money back. So if he was cheated, then he's made whole. Mm-hmm. If she didn't cheat, it's funny the way she's like passing off like 15,000, no big deal. It makes me think that maybe this money isn't like life changing, social status altering money. So if she lost 130,000 or whatever of her money when she didn't cheat, it seems like she's going to be financially okay with despite that. So which is not to say it's okay that she's not getting the money back, but big picture, first world problem, that's not going to be the end of her world. So
yeah, and the employee got fired. So I mean, he's no longer involved in the production. So if she had an inside man and she was cheating, he's gone. And then, obviously, if she wasn't cheating, this thief is gone.
I just can sense there's got to be a Netflix documentary kind of coming in a couple of years that will go into this whole thing. That'd be pretty cool. But I think the takeaway is we get a very memorable poker hand that we can all analyze, like any classic debate in society. We have just, obviously Garrett's very memorable reaction to the hands being revealed, his eyes darting across the table like that. Very funny. So I think in the end, once the fire of the situation dies down, the poker will move on. So
I mean, we'll see. I mean, this is bringing a lot of attention to the game from people who are outside of it. I mean, LA Times is writing articles about this. A lot of people's writing articles about this. And I think it's going to make, I think a lot of people feel like, who aren't experienced with poker. And again, keep in mind, Ben and I aren't semi-professional players or anything. I'd say we're experienced hobbyists. But a lot of people who just are maybe familiar with poker, having seen it a couple times on television, they all look at what Robby Lew did, because they don't really understand the game. They're like, oh, she made a sick hero call. This is all just a bunch of people being sexist toward her. It's just an odd situation. And I'm not saying, by the way, that there isn't sexism toward Robby Lew, because I think there's a lot of unwanted comments about her physical appearance and a lot of things that I just don't think are appropriate. But, the situation is more complicated than that gut check of it was a hero call, they're all out to get this person. There's something else going on here that, again, let's let the investigation play out. I feel like the preponderance of evidence leads against her not cheating, but let's see what Hustler comes up with.
Right.
Yeah.
I completely agree. And just in general, it always seems like Garrett is often the target of controversy in the poker games he takes place in. I remember a couple of years ago, his infamous hand against Armenian Mike, where Armenian Mike, now Garrett wasn't in the hand, but he was at the table and was trying to advocate for Ryan Feldman for the rightful outcome of the hand, where Armenian Mike slides in a whole rack of his chips into a very small pot, and then when he gets snap called by what was almost the nuts by Feldman, yeah, he tries to take his rack back and say he was joking, and Garrett just put his foot down saying that's, you made a bet and you have to own up to it. And that was a very memorable hand too. I mean, I'm 100% Mike was completely on that hand. And it does show that it doesn't have to be these big tournaments that poker controversy and conversation can take place from. It can be from just a simple cash game that gets streamed online. That both cash games and tournaments both play an equal role in the overall poker sphere of stories like this.
Yeah, I mean, we reviewed cash game TV shows in an earlier episode. I really like that episode. Recommend that y'all watch it. Yeah, I mean, it's this sorts of action is very interesting. I mean, these long form streams where you have, maybe one or two notable players. We had Phil Ivey at the table in the case of this Robby Lew hand. And then you just have sort of all these somewhat well-known semi-professionals, but maybe people who aren't super familiar to, the people who used to watch the WSOP back in the 2000s. It's kind of interesting to see this form of poker entertainment played out. I think it's okay. I don't think it's super special. I prefer sort of more edited entertainment with a clear narrative and characters being constructed and, one or two side segments, because just 3 hours of a poker stream, and sometimes even longer than that, there's so many opportunities where hands just don't amount to something super interesting. There's long pauses. Sometimes it takes, time for people to really feel comfortable and start to open up at the table and talk to each other. It's okay for me. I don't watch too much of it. I hadn't really seen too much of Hustlers beforehand. But maybe I'll be interested in checking it out more now that this hand has happened.
Yeah, another recent poker news tonight, or I guess right now, is the final table, day 3 of the Super High Roller Bowl 7. Mm-hmm. I've been following on the first couple of days of action, and Negreanu, after some pretty bad luck in some of the poker masters recently, is among the chip leaders, and he's been kind of the chip leader for the majority of the tournament, and so he's been playing some very good Dylan Negreanu poker, and with 5 players left and 4 pay slots, again, it's one of the more painful bubbles in poker for the $300,000 buy-in. So, the Super High Roller Bowl has been around for about 6 years or so, 6 or 7 years, and it's again just a kind of a high stakes, high rolling tournament. It was originally $500,000 buy-in, now it's slightly more manageable, $300K. The field of those tournaments is actually pretty small, but it gets some pretty good coverage by Poker Go with Nick Schulman and Ali Najad in the booth. And so I recommend that we can maybe do an episode about Super High Roller Bowl in the future,
sure.
Because there's usually a lot of money swept in hands. Although it's funny how it's kind of the same few players just kind of sweeping money over and over again. You have to wonder really, is that a profitable adventure for all these players if they're just kind of playing every year and maybe making 800,000 over 3 years, you lose 100,000 if you play 3 times. So very curious about that.
Yeah, I haven't seen too much of the tournament, but I'll try to watch it. It's definitely interesting.
Yeah. But moving from kind of modern poker news to back to our retrospective look back, we last time covered a few consecutive World Series of Poker Europes. And, again, in 2013 was kind of this experimental phase for the brands. They were expanding both from not just Europe, but to the Asia Pacific area. And so the original plan for them was to alternate years, have Europe, Asia Pacific, which really kind of lasted all of like 1 year, if even that. So, but regardless, there was a produced episodic breakdown coverage of the final tables for these events. And so, we kind of had a variety pack of coverage styles for 2010, 2011. I mean, dating back all of Europe, they were constantly, even more regularly than the American version, changing the formula up. And we have a continuation of those sort of experimental alternate broadcast versions with the 2013 and 2014 iterations of these tournaments.
Yeah, I mean, 2013 WSOP Europe, I mean, it's, here we are with the WSOP Europe. The year before, Phil Hellmuth had won and, brought more interest into the game. So I was really, sort of looking forward to this one to see what exactly it would be like. Would it be any different now that Phil Hellmuth had maybe brought a little bit more interest into the main event? I mean, it's kind of interesting looking at Europe and Asia Pacific in that there are WSOP events, but there were people who were arguing that like those events didn't count if you won bracelets, like they were sort of like a side thing, How do you build publicity for these events? How do you put these events on television and project out to the world that these are legitimate poker tournaments on the same level as the Las Vegas version? it's sort of, that's one of the questions I've been sort of thinking about as I've been watching all these European main events. And so going into 2013, I mean, I just can't believe what I saw.
I was left speechless by the broadcast of the 2013 main event Final Table Europe, which is funny because the Europes and the Asia Pacifics to a lesser extent kind of remind me of like the WNBA or like the NFL Europe, where it's like they're trying to branch out, but the market is so much smaller. The actual revenue is so much smaller because even this one had 375 players in it, which is, again, that's less than Print Moneymaker in America. That's just a really small number. And you'd think you'd get a few locals in there because they're playing in France again. So it was, I think, maybe the second or third year, the third year in a row that they were playing the Europe main event in France. The French raise rule was actually gone by this point. They had altered it. Maybe players had complained that there's really no point in limiting, the gameplay of the poker pros. They actually, it was a very typical structure up as you would expect with any main event in the Europe era. And so the final table though only began with 6 players rather than 8 or 9 or it felt like they had sort of, because the field was smaller, the final table to feel a bit more kind of in the right ratio of the field size to the final table size. They wanted to reduce it. And so you would think, we had a very solid broadcast of Helmuth winning it all with Lon, Norm, Esfandiari, Jesse Silva, and also Jesse Silva got in there. And I was very excited to watch this thing. And then, like you said, we were left speechless by this broadcast.
Yeah, I mean, just getting into it, there's no commentators. I mean, if the intro starts and there's no, Lon usually announces, we're here from Paris, France, here to show you the WSOP, blah, 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 right? There's no announcement. So I was thinking, okay, there's no announcement. That's no big deal. We'll just get into the action. They just kind of want to have this music here. And then it just keeps going and there's no commentary at all. And I was just like halfway through, I'm just like, what is going on here? I said to myself, did they forget to add commentary to this? Like, did they just upload this and forget to add commentary? And then I'm thinking like, maybe it'll be in episode 2 and maybe episode 1's just an error or a work print or something. No, it's not in episode 2 either. And there's no segments. There's no like music over the top or anything. It's just, the microphones are just recording the players at the table. You hear Jack Effel in the background announce the hands and you hear them riffling chips. And then I also thought like, okay, well, maybe along the way, the reason why they don't have the commentary is because the players are going to be talking to each other throughout and they want to highlight that, kind of like Poker After Dark where the commentary is more minimalist. So you can hear the players talk to each other. No, I mean, most of them don't speak English, so that makes or English isn't their first language or whatever, so that makes sense. But it's just so bizarre.
It was weird because it really felt like this was produced to have commentary because you have an introduction, usually you hear a voiceover, you have player bios, the chip count shown. It was just the strangest thing because it just felt like it was very in line with the 2013 main event America in the graphics and just the style of episode. It felt like it wasn't like a live raw feed of the table for an hour. It was a produced, with fast forwarding to hands. I covered 3 levels in this episode, and I should mention these episodes were 52 minutes long. So that's actually halfway between a regular episode and the kind of supersized hour-and-a-half broadcast time slot. So this was a bit longer. So you have 104 minutes of just raw poker with very little table talk. Table talk ramps up a bit over time in the episode, to be fair, but the hand footage is pretty raw as far as like this hand here is not showing too many cuts. So like fast forward to a long tank, and it is just it really makes you appreciate the commentary, even bad commentary, because you just can get it almost feels like it could function as an ASMR video, like all the chip riffling. But that's really all that's happening is just chip riffling. And
I mean, Adrian Mateos takes this one down. I mean, he's still around in the game, still, pretty good poker player, but, no other big names really. And I mean, nothing in terms of the poker play, nothing super exciting really happens. Mateos has a big stack and just sort of manages to hang on it, find his spots. I mean, Soulier, who gets second place, seemed like a decent player, nothing special.
I mean, he wins a couple big hands early in episode 1, and then he picks off a bluff shove by a huge, who was fourth place at one point. And so, I mean, there's some high level play, I guess, at work if you're kind of like focused in on the action, but it's kind of hard to when there's no commentary. Like it's amazing how when you watch we've watched hundreds of hours of poker with commentary, and it's amazing just how much even light commentary, like on some of the live like casino feeds, there's less, direct over narration by the booth. But even just a small amount of narration makes a huge difference when you're watching poker like this, especially for a final table where you're supposed to try to care what happens in the end. And there's no bits to like kind of break up anything. And again, it's just the strangest thing. Like 2013 was already a pretty weak main event, and the modern main event, it's among the weakest before the last couple of the Poker Go versions. But this takes the cake for probably the worst episodes in poker history, perhaps, because of the narration just kind of not being there kills any interest I have watching these.
Yeah, it's just, I don't understand what their logic was. I guess they just figured this isn't a super exciting final table. Lon and Norm have something better to do with their time. I mean, I don't get it. Were they not available? We don't have to have Lon and Norm every single time for WSOP. You can have Esfandiari, you can have Helmuth, you can have somebody else. Yeah, I mean, you've got so many options here for people you could bring in. Just bring in two guys. Have Chris Moneymaker and Sammy Farha comment. I don't care, something else. I mean, it's just very odd. Yeah, it's just, what is there to say about this other than it's just lazy?
I mean, the heads up match was a very pendulum effect heads up match. Soulier dominates the first half of heads up play, and then Mateos kind of takes over from there. It was 164 hands of heads up, which was more than half of the overall table, which was 294 hands. So that it's a long heads up match, which it seems like every other Europe main event heads up match is really long, followed by one really short one or one really one-sided battle. So that's something you can take away, I guess, from that. But it's baffling that this was produced. Yeah. I'm half convinced that this originally had a commentary and the Pogo version just didn't have it because they lost the rights to it or something. But the sound of just having the raw chip, I mean, you have to mix an episode like that. So I don't understand. It's baffling.
Yeah, and one of the other weird things is that there's, usually there'd be like graphics on the screen that, they'll like sort of cut from the action to show a graphic of like a player, their photograph, and sort of like little biographical details. And they do that in these episodes. So they edited these episodes. They had to have put these graphics in, and they do little montages in between the breaks, showing people at a train station or whatever. I mean, so they clearly put thought into some of the visuals, and the graphics all look fine, the cinematography, the lighting all looks fine. It's just, I don't understand why you wouldn't put commentary over it. The music is the generic WSOP music of this time period.
Well, the introduction did have it had the Europe sort of theme song, which is again a different song than the Americans, which would rotate or whatever. So that was still there, but very strange.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, you're right. I mean, it just goes to show commentary, which just seems, some people think Lon and Norm shtick is a little old, out of date. It just goes to show that even just basic commentary just really makes a difference in terms of what you're supposed to be looking for, what the editors want you to believe about these people, just how the game works. I mean, imagine if you don't know anything about poker and you're watching these two episodes, like you'd be so confused about what's going on. It's just,
I mean, this aired on ESPN, for example, with no commentary. Imagine how quickly the viewers would be tuning out. Like, honestly, we could just record our own commentary and for free for Poker Go, and they could use that, and they'd be better off probably with those episodes.
Poker Go, give us a call. We will provide commentary for these two episodes. Our payment will be that you upload all of the unedited final tables of the main event. You don't have to pay us in money, but just upload all of the unedited footage of, just everything that happened. And
give us the Darvin Noon bluffing his wife moment too.
Yes, get that too.
So again, it's 2 episodes. So we're moving on to our next final table, which is the 2013 Asia Pacific main event played in Melbourne, Australia. It's the first of its kind playing in this region of the world. A bit bigger, 405 players. I wonder if it's more just a kind of a proximity location thing where I guess maybe some players are a bit more able to to fly over. Maybe just the locals were more willing to pony up the $10,000 Australian dollars to enter this tournament. And this one, a bit more back to normal, in line with the 2013 main event in America. The Best Day of My Life song introduction returns to the introduction. Again, we have it's a two-part final table, and much like a couple of our previous European main event final tables, we have a recognizable top pro as well as a very recent November 9er in the final table. Russell Thomas being the November 9er from 2012, so again only a year afterwards. And Daniel Negreanu, our boy, second in chips to start this final table with just, again, 8 players left. Again, continuing the pattern of having kind of 8 instead of 9, I guess, for the same reason that they had 6 in the 2013 Europe. And so this, again, a much better pairing of episodes for a final table just by default compared to the European.
Right. Yeah, I mean, we're also back to, we have side action as a sort of side segment with Antonio Esfandiari playing Australian rules football, which I'm just going to say is over my head. I don't understand how it works. Yeah, I mean, Lon and Norm are back. We have also bracelet moments, segments here and there. So yeah, I mean, they clearly put effort into this. I mean, going to Australia for the first time, this was a big deal. Poker in Australia was, before with Hashem, there was a bit of sort of boom in Australia, but it was, starting to take off now. And yeah, having, the fortune of Daniel Negreanu be not just at the table, but the chip leader, and pretty much just had all of the momentum at his back. I mean, this was his day to win this tournament. Really helps the episodes.
Yeah, it was definitely a much more of a smooth sailing triumph for him compared to even finishing runner-up in the 2009 European final table.
Right.
Again, with 8 players left, this first part gets us from 8 players down to 5. And this final table took a fair amount of time to get that first bust out. It took 3 hours into the action, 2/3 into the episode itself, before we lose a player. Russell Thomas goes out, kind of always was a short stack, could never really spin it up. You want to pick up a big hand and really kind of go from there. You can never really do that. Negreanu pretty much wins a lot of the early pots, and there's kind of a running gag where he's betting in increments of 4, like 404,000 or 44,000 or whatnot, and he gets pocket fours a fair amount too. So it kind of plays into that joke by Lon and Norm in the booth. So that's kind of fun, and it is perhaps the most smooth sailing adventure for Negreanu we've maybe ever seen at a table in main event history, because he just kind of has no resistance, kind of a Joe McKeon closing out, a table, smooth sailing fashion, really.
I think it should be illegal to compare Negreanu to McKeon just because of what happened with their clash. But yeah, you're right. I mean, Negreanu, this is also not just his prime in terms of just non-countering really any opposition, but also his table talk. I mean, he's got talking chips, he's chatting, everybody's heads off. Everyone's sort of, smitten with him. This is before, if the rake is too high, that's actually a good thing. So he's still sort of in his golden boy moment. And yeah, I mean, this is just his tournament. This is just his 2 episodes. I mean, they try to hype up Spindler a little bit and sort of say like maybe he could threaten him, but then he doesn't get anything going. I mean, he just kept getting screwed over. And then they also try to build up Winfred Yu, who just gets so many cards. It's like not even funny. He's all in, what was it, 8 times, and manages to survive each time until he finally busts in 3rd place after being the short stack with 8 to begin with, which is just insane. But yeah,
it's really kind of the main subplot is he just cannot lose an all-in hand no matter how dominant he is. Queen 6 against aces, ace, just all these wild runouts. He pulls it off. And again, he was never kind of a big stack at any point, so he's kind of doing the old double up 10 big blinds to 20 big blinds kind of routine, which we see all the time on final tables, but still very amusing. Part 1 is, I think it's just okay for a final table. It's nothing special, but it's still way better than majority of anything else from 2013, so that definitely helps. And again, Benny Spindler was the chip leader to begin the final table. He goes out in 6th place. So again, at least it's not a Philip Hilm level disaster going out first or something like that, but he was also in the 2013 main event, Europe final table, so he was kind of having a good year, you could say, but couldn't close out either one. Part 2 gets us from 5 players down to 1, and Cal Burns, who goes up in 5th to Negreanu. Again, he had made a really good fold on the last hand of episode 1 to really kind of survive at least.
Right.
But probably the best part of episode 2 is the constant pay jump, taunting and mentions by Negreanu to his shorter stacked final table neighbors, because he's way ahead in 1st place, and he's like, but how much do you get if you fold again? Oh, I don't think about it. Okay, and it's lighthearted fun. It's not at anyone's expense, which is again we've talked about before is a key thing to kind of needling opponents. As long as it's in good fun and not at someone's expense, then it's fair game in my book.
Yeah, I mean, he's saying things like, "Oh, you get $100,000 for folding away your second place. I'd take that. That's a great deal, right?" That's not making fun of anybody's poker play. That's not calling any names. That's just sort of making light of the situation. And again, yeah, I mean, like, there's a montage of this episode about how awesome Daniel Negreanu is. It's just like Daniel Negreanu rules the world. If this was a Survivor season, it would be Survivor Redemption Island because he's just ruling the world like Boston Rob did in that season, and
Yes.
everyone loves him and everything. Yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to like belittle this. Like, this was entertaining to watch, but that's essentially what this is. If you really hate Daniel Negreanu, you're going to hate these two episodes. So don't watch out.
And if you know Satsis, then you're going to just feel so bad for him because he was second in chips with 5 left. He wins a hand and then just completely gets destroyed by the deck against basically everyone else at the table. You, Martin, and Negreanu all just get suck out on him, and he really was in contention. If he wins that last hand that he busts on, and Negreanu, who wins on a 2-outer on the river, he really could have won this whole thing.
Yeah.
Because that 2-outer comes true that one time, Negreanu hits 9 million chips, which is almost double what he began with 500 play resumed in the part 2, and from there it's just a matter of time before Negreanu closes out with that big a chip lead. He never had that big a chip lead against Shulman in 09. So that really shows you once you have that big a lead, really, even if you get unlucky once, which Negreanu does, then you can close things out.
Yeah, I mean, Martin, he tries his best, but just can't really get anything through. And, again, this was Negreanu's show. I mean, yeah, it's hard. It's hard. I have mixed feelings about sort of when one player just dominates a couple episodes, because it'd be kind of fun to see, big stack bowling and all that. But on the other hand, I like a little intrigue. I like a little fight and see, I think a true poker player, has to sort of ride out the hills and valleys and make it to the end. And, I would have liked to have seen a little bit more of that. But alas, it's always nice.
I mean, you say that, but the heads up play, which is the last 15 minutes of the episode, there's a couple of pretty amusing all-ins where Negreanu is having like sweaty flashbacks of 09, and hand number 200 of the final table, Negreanu gets rivered by Martins on the river. So when he was again one card away from winning the whole thing, and it reminds me of the flashback from 4 years prior. Yeah. And it's implemented by the Lon's call in the booth. No, can he close it out? No, and then Negreanu's like, he plays that one off okay, but then 9 hands later, another all-in. Martin shoves 8-4 pre-flop against Negreanu's ace-8, dominated. Flop gives Negreanu an ace, but then it gives Martin a gut shot. Negreanu's like, why can't it ever be easy? Oh, he's whining, and then all of a sudden the turn card, boom, gives Martin a straight. He kicks the table, spilling all the chips over, which is hilarious. Right. And then he's so upset he doesn't notice that the river card makes it for a chop pot. And so, I mean, it was unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, in situations like that, still Negreanu had a massive chip lead. When I mean sort of, I like to see players struggle for it, the chip lead, go back and forth, that sort of thing. But yeah, I mean,
Martin, that kick chop hand, like a karate movie, is probably my favorite hand of this entire 2-parter.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It is a classic because again, if you on the heels of watching his 09 European tragedy at the end, it is just so it's cathartic to be like, okay, it's going wrong, but it's going a little bit right still at the last point. And then a couple of hands later, Negreanu does take it down in another flip situation that he actually holds on to this time and wins a bracelet. And this is his most recent bracelet. Yeah. He's had a bracelet drop for almost a decade now. And he did come close the last couple of World Series, making it to heads up or the final 3. But this is kind of his last, big bracelet. Although he has won other big tournaments since then, so it's not a total wash.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen Negreanu in years since. He's done very well. I mean, he almost made the final table in 2015, and he's definitely in there. But yeah, I mean, this was his last sort of big bracelet win. Hopefully, we'll see more of him in the future and more of this sort of style of coverage, where we're just having a player who's just having so much fun. I mean, Negreanu is just clearly here to have fun, be the table captain.
Yes.
And, all the other players are just they're good sports. They're willing to sort of let Negreanu take the spotlight and get in little moments. I mean, you also had some funny comments with Negreanu, you being a sort of casino owner. He's like, oh, Negreanu will get you a smoking table. I'll get you this, I'll get you that, which I thought was funny. So,
yeah. I mean, part two had, I enjoyed the heads up part of the episode. I enjoyed the fall of Satsis and went for you just getting lucky. So it was a pretty good final part two, better than part one, if you ask me.
Yeah.
And, it's definitely higher up there on the tier rankings for final table conclusions.
Mm-hmm.
Now the next year we had the 2014 Asia Pacific, which was, again, very similar to 2013, only that the field was a little bit smaller, actually. It was only 329 players. I think they expanded more events out, though, so that might have maybe minimized some of the locals if they could play in maybe a smaller buy-in tournament. Maybe that's where some of that money went. And this time, whereas the 2013 was very emblematic of the just regular episode structure, the final table for 2014 was edited and produced much like a regular American final table was, with the hand count in the corner, the chip counts in chip stack order, with Esfandiari kind of commenting in the booth with Lon and Norm, and so very much in that genre of coverage compared to the styles previously we've seen.
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely the feel like you're watching this live. Like, they're definitely trying to replicate that. And I don't mind that sort of style of coverage. I think it can make it a little bit more exciting, where you're almost like having to guess, like, oh, where exactly is the narrative going? Who exactly is going to win here? Even though, I mean, sort of a more polished product can be a little bit more meaningful to watch because the editor's, paying more attention to things and you have sort of more goofier segments. But yeah, I mean, I think this style of coverage is completely fine. Certainly better than what we got with the 2013 Europe. I mean, ugh. But yeah, and interesting final table. We're down to six-handed here. We have Frank Casella, who's sort of, I guess, the highlight player of the table. But we also have the only woman at this table and only woman at the WSOP sort of Asia Pacific main event final table, and that's Italiano, which is sort of interesting.
We hadn't seen a woman at the final table of any event since really Annette Oberstad had gotten took it all down in 2007 in Europe. It was, and it's mentioned that Esfandiari was in the booth in 2014 for the Asia Pacific. He was the bubble boy in the 2013 Asia Pacific.
Right.
They mentioned that, and so it's kind of funny to have him be there in the booth this time. And again, this is a very much kind of a hybrid of the 2012 main event Europe, where Helmuth won and Esfandiari was commenting. It was very similar to that, plus editing things down a little bit. Jack Salter was the chip leader when this table began.
Yeah.
I kind of know him without knowing him. I kind of see him maybe sometimes in some of the EPT broadcast, or the PCA stuff. So he's kind of just, I know he's like a good player. He's kind of not someone I was super familiar with.
Yeah, same here. Yeah.
We also had Davies, Wong, and Montgomery. So these are, for the most part, new players as far as me as a poker viewer was concerned. Frank Casella wearing scrubs is kind of funny because I work in healthcare, so it's kind of funny. I've got scrubs hanging right back there actually. So it's kind of funny to have that be referenced. Casella actually name drops Esfandiari when he had busted him when he asked, "Is he in the booth today?" Because it's funny when that kind of reality meets the booth there. So this final table, both parts really kind of flew by for me. Like I had this at my usual speed, and it didn't drag. It just kind of flew by. It wasn't boring. It wasn't super compelling, but it was like a almost kind of a relaxing kind of a viewing experience for me. If it's finding you're in the booth commentating, even if someone's tanking, you can hear him talk, explain the thought process. That was very nice. And with six-handed play, everybody kind of gets a chance to get in the action, even if they don't. And in Italiano's case, she does bust relatively early as a short stack. So, and she kind of blew it in a sense, but she was in that tournament on a $65 satellite. So she made a huge ROI on that venture in the main event. So good for her. But otherwise, I mean, the play is pretty unglamorous. It's a lot of big hands running into big hands. So, but it was a pleasant experience to me. It was interesting. It wasn't. It was a few hands were a little bit slow, but the commentary made it work for me.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I really found annoying was that it kept going on break. Like there were multiple times where it would come back from the break, so to speak.
Yeah.
There'd be like one or two hands, and it would go back on break, and that happened multiple times, which again kind of makes it feel like a live style of coverage. They have to go on commercial break frequently or whatever. But yeah, I mean, I thought this was perfectly enjoyable. If nothing super special, I would have liked Italiano to stick around, but yeah, shoving with making her. What do you even call that play? the limp,
Like a stop and go. I don't know.
the stop and go shove. Yeah, where she calls off a bunch of her chips with ace 10 of diamonds, where she should have been shoving pre-flop, and then queen high flop, and then she goes all in, and Casella has top pair. So yeah, I mean, it would have been nice to have seen and heard a little bit more from her, but alas, she had to leave. And luckily, I mean, the other players do make up for it. I mean, Casella was willing to talk to these other players. And Henry Wong, of all people, just like turns out to be just table captain extraordinaire, just talking, making a bunch of faces, clearly having a time talking to people during hands. I mean, it really made up for it.
Yeah, and the thing about this is that the table talk, there was a good amount of it without it being overwhelming, kind of like in Poker After Dark, where everyone's talking constantly. You can never really focus on what anyone's saying. So that was a pretty good balance. By part two, we're down to 3 players. And Salter and Davies are way ahead, and Wong, who I was rooting for, is unfortunately got 1/3 of their stack when 3-handed play continues. So he's not in a great spot, and he ends up busting after he kind of like folded his way down to under $1 million. Like he would call a call bet and then having to fold on like the turn of river.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, he runs into Davies aces when he picks up something he's willing to shove with. And then heads up play is the back half of part 2. Mm-hmm. It lasted 46 hands, which is again kind of in the middle ground of heads up play showdowns. It was an hour and 40 minutes in real time, and they were close enough in chips where it wasn't like one person had a clear advantage. 5 million against 4 million. It's it's 3-2, but that's manageable in that case.
Yeah, I thought it was a fun heads-up match. As I said before, I like heads-up matches that are back and forth. You have 2 players who, they're not, I'm not saying they're like Phil Ivey tier players, but they're pretty good players, and it goes back and forth, and there's some talk that goes, each player's way. And then, yeah, the last hand, I mean, that's just one of those rounders, Hollywood,
Yeah, which you don't see very often. I mean, the overwhelming majority of heads-up final hands are all in pre-flop hands, with maybe 1 or 2 exceptions, Peter Eastgate being one of those probably. But the flop being 6-10-10 when the hand Davies has 6-6 against Salter's queen 10.
Yeah.
So again, that's trips of a queen kicker against a full house. And again, Salter still has outs, if God forbid he's up against, pocket 6, but really that's the only hand he can be, concerned about. And so that actual hand is the last 10 minutes of the episode. It really, you don't often see a last hand take that long, but they were, that was just, you can imagine these key situations, they're taking their time to think their actions through, and it kind of makes for a good conclusion to this final table.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this, Salter wasn't super talkative before, but that's within his right. I mean, he wanted to stay focused on it, and he seemed like a nice enough guy with Davies.
Yeah.
I mean, this was perfectly enjoyable, perfectly serviceable. I would, definitely say that if you're interested in sort of a little bit more sort of back and forth poker play, you could check this one out versus, the Daniel Negreanu stuff is a lot more just sort of king of the castle, run people over. And yeah, I mean, we didn't really talk about Casella. Do you want to say he blew up? I mean, I think he kind of.
I mean, he goes from chip leader to out in 2 hands, which is pretty crazy. And we have another one of those classic pre-flop accidental raise call moments, which Esfandiari is often the first one to say you need to take full advantage of that situation when it happens.
Yeah.
Before, I'm not really a fan of being like that, but I understand you got to do what you got to do. If it helps you win, then you got to do what you got to do. Again, Esfandiari in the booth always elevates a final table broadcast for me.
Yeah,
he's so great at kind of playing off Lon and Norm, but having his the poker acumen to really comment on the action thoroughly. It's a shame he's not really in the commentary scene the last couple of years, but hopefully maybe time will change and he'll turn that around.
Yeah.
But luckily, actually, Esfandiari does join the action in the next event we're discussing, the 2014 Asia Pacific High Roller Tournament, which really, besides the one drop, we haven't really talked about high roller events all that much so far. This actually took place chronologically before the main event, but I watched it after the main event.
Mhm.
They kind of name dropped the event a couple times in the main event broadcast too, just because it happened beforehand. And so this was a $25,000 Australian dollar buy-in tournament. And again, of the high rollers, the field's always smaller, so we have just 68 players in here. The booth though is Lon and Esfandiari
Right.
for part one, and then Helmuth in part two. So that was kind of cool to mix things up, a rotating carousel of commentators, because Helmuth's also very good in his own way, commenting on. He's very good at kind of praising someone's play in a hand.
Yeah.
Because, especially when it's like a Helmuth style moment, when they make like a trap play or just a solid bet when you should be betting. So that was very cool. Helmuth was actually the bubble boy of the high roller tournament, so he was very fresh off of his loss and knew the players at work and their styles and how they would be playing. So that also helped add a little extra edge to the commentary for him for part two.
Yeah, and we have Leah, who had, not won a bracelet yet, but was sort of seen as like the guy to beat. I mean, he had twice the chips, the second place player.
He had half of all the chips at the start of the final table, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we had Jesse Sylvia, we have Duhamel, we have our good friend Roberts from 2 Months, 2 Million. This is definitely a good final table. And yeah, I mean, to hear, Esfandiari and Helmuth at an advanced level talk about these guys and break down what exactly they're doing, it's always refreshing. I mean, again, I love Norm's commentary, but let's just I'll be diplomatic to Norm and just say he's not a poker expert. I'll just say that much. And, it's just sort of nice to have a bit of a change of pace. Again, nothing super exciting in terms of the format, kind of just fairly standard stuff. No goofy segments or anything like that, just very much on the action. And, we're back to the, Daniel Negreanu model of King of the Hill, with Leah really being his show. I mean, not to say that the other players aren't in there and definitely looking for an edge and trying to move up. But yeah, I mean, Leah was this was his to win.
Well, Leah was raising any two cards, which we see a lot, but it's another thing actually to see like 6-deuce and queen-4 and all these weird, goofy hands raising. And he wins a few number of those things. Again, the ICM of the situation, you have two short stacks, one kind of mass stack and two big stacks, one mass stack and three really short stacks. So again, and it's the high roller, so there's more money at stake per page than normal. Roberts, again, just can never seem to get a break whenever we're watching him on these final tables. He goes out first with ace jack against queen jack against Jan. And we see Sam Koulis doubling up with a short stack a couple of times. Why can't our boy Roberts win just one of those?
I know, right?
But really, this episode, I didn't write down every single hand number with the action because a lot of these hands are on the. There's some raise and take shown. This is a bit more of a live, sort of unedited. But it's a better version of this than 2019 was, for example, in America. And so very few hands actually get skipped in these edits. But some of the bigger hands, obviously, I took note of. And of course, the final hand here, Sylvia gets a double knockout, which at final tables really never happened, but they always happen in these European or Asia-Pacific ones, it seems like.
That's true.
Sylvia double KOs Duhamel and Sam Koulis on the river of all things. And with that, he actually hits a decent sized stack to kind of be in the swing of things for 300 play once part two jumps around.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely the sort of highlight of this. You're right. I mean, it's so rare to see double knockouts. The hands kind of play themselves. I mean, Koulis shoves with ace-8, makes sense. Duhamel's got 9s. It's hard for him to get away with that. And Sylvia's got queens. But yeah, I mean, to see that run out, I mean, Koulis turns 2 pair, and you're thinking, all right, here we go. This guy's back in it. And then, bam, the river hits. Ugh, devastating. They took it well, but yeah, just.
I mean, and then going to part two, one of the best parts of part two was just having Helmuth talk to his booth mates, because it's not something we see very often. It's usually just kind of they're talking about the action, not to each other as much when it comes to the poker. And so that was very cool. A slight different dynamic in the booth there was very cool. And it was kind of ironic to have Sylvia at the table while Helmuth was talking, because it was the inverse of when Helmuth was at the table and Sylvia was in the booth for 2012. Right. So that was very cool also to have the inverse of that. Of course, Sylvia doesn't win it, but Helmuth did win it. So not quite a curse to have that happen, but
right.
Kind of thing. And heads up play, as I often say, it's the last 18 minutes of the episode is extremely lopsided. Like, we've seen at least some attempt to show some, balance to the action at heads up. Not in this case. Leah just steamrolls Jan and takes it down. It gets to the point where Jan is shoving king 4 when Leah has king 7. I mean, Come on.
Yeah, I mean, it happens. They said that Jan was on the younger side and was a less experienced player. Leah had, again, been around for a while, but just hadn't quite gotten his hands on the bracelet yet. So, yeah, I mean, it's not surprising to say that. A little disappointing. I would have liked to have had Sylvia go heads up with Leah. That would have been more fun to see. But, still, I mean, Helmuth does make this coverage work. And as you said, like Lon and Helmuth sort of have this rapport with each other. There's a lot of great lines. I mean, yeah. Lon says at one point, you have more apologies than World Series final tables. I mean, there's all sorts of back and forth stuff. And yeah, I mean, Helmuth just like really gets into this. I mean, there's one hand where Sylvia has a straight draw and he bets 200,000. And, Phil's going, come on, Leah, you got to shove. These are the moments a champion is made in. You got to do this. And he does it. And like Helmuth is actually excited to hear him, not just like, not necessarily rooting for a particular player, picking favorites, but just be like invested in what's going on and be eager to see these exciting plays that he agrees with. It's a side of Helmuth we just haven't really seen very often. And
it's a good way of putting towards separating Helmuth, the poker player at the table, versus Helmuth, the human.
Yeah.
We're still seeing him in one context. I mean, I saw him for 2 stints in Vegas last year, and that was, he wasn't like yelling at me or something for saying hi or something. So, obviously I'm not expecting that, but that's one of the reasons why I root for him, because he's just such a unique character in the world of the poker world.
Yeah, absolutely.
And as far as high rollers in general, I mean, the Asia Pacific had I think 1 or 2 more events that year than the year prior. Yeah, this was the last time they'd had the Asia Pacific. Ironically, I guess it didn't really work out the way they wanted to. The number of players was too small, but we see more of these high roller, bigger buy-in tournaments nowadays than we did a decade ago. Not just the big 1-for-1 drop. I'm talking about 50K, 100K, $250,000. These are much more commonplace at both this rules of poker, but also other poker brands out there, the EPTs, the PCAs, all that stuff. They're much more commonplace nowadays.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not too familiar with high roller stuff. I think it's fine to watch. It is sort of nice to see name players that you've sort of known for years make deep runs, as they often do in these events. So it's a little bit more exciting. I would like to see a little bit more and get a little bit more familiar with the style of play in high rollers in comparison to the main event or something else. So I can't comment too much on, because I'm just not too experienced in high roller strategy and all that. But I would like to see more of that as time goes on.
I mean, there's a give and take, because then you sacrifice the idea of this average Joe at the table, busting Phil Hellmuth for millions of dollars at the end or something. You lose that chance, but then you get to see all these players and have known for years, and you can watch them continue to add to their list of accomplishments in the poker world. Again, I think there's good and bad of high roller tournaments as far as from a television's point of view. But they have their place in the roster of different categories of what to watch on TV.
Absolutely, yeah.
But I think that about covers our look at this sort of variety pack of the European, Asia Pacific. This is kind of the end of this era of the Worlds of Poker, where they were experimenting with this sort of branching out to the Asia Pacific section of the globe. Obviously, the World Series of Poker Europe is still going strong every year. We have the 2022 Europe coming up later in October. Mm-hmm. So we'll be able to follow along there. Again, I kind of put it in that sort of adjacent category, because it's not quite as many players running out to the tournaments, which kind of don't take away from the credit of winning an event there, but it changes kind of just the vibe I get from when I hear someone won a bracelet in Europe, when they beat 100 people to win a bracelet versus 800 in America.
Well, there's a lot of events at the WSOP in Vegas where the player sizes are just so different. I mean, some of these smaller events like Raz or whatever only has a couple hundred players versus the Colossus, which has 18,000. I mean, I think, I don't think event size should necessarily take away from the credit or location. So in my opinion, if you win a WSOP Europe bracelet or Asia Pacific bracelet or Africa bracelet, wherever it might be, it counts as a bracelet for me. Yeah. So really shouldn't take away that, every one of these people who have won these bracelets, yeah, I mean, they got lucky. Negreanu had the spotlight on him. He had everybody sort of rooting for him implicitly, but he still made a number of decisions along the way in order to win that bracelet, and he deserves credit for that.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there, and we'll see if the brand ever decides to re-expand out to other areas, or if it will kind of stick to the American and European sectors.
Yeah.
my guess is I'll probably stick to those two because the player tournament is still very strong, and you want to. I mean, they had the pandemic main events be split between in Europe and America, so that's kind of ingrained in their blood at this point anyway.
Yeah, I mean, that was a fun experiment to have it be, one American branch, one European branch. Maybe they can do that again someday. I mean, I don't necessarily mind having an Asia Pacific, Europe, etc. I mean, the game is expanding in Russia, it's expanding in Asia, it's expanding obviously in Macau is a big scene. Why not do a little bit of marketing and reach out to those people in other countries and try to build more interest in the game? I mean, I think they should definitely consider doing it again.
Especially since you have circuit events in America, in states all across the country. In a similar sense, you could have circuit events. I mean, I guess you don't have to, but I mean, I understand that there's a process between deciding where to put a tournament and for what to be at stake there. So
yeah, absolutely.
But I think that about covers our talk on this episode. We kind of covered a lot of different stuff this time. Hopefully you guys might appreciate this new kind of style of format we did for this time. If you want to join us for an episode, obviously let us know. We're happy to have a guest star here. We're going to keep reaching out for more interviews because we've had some amazing guests over the last few months, so we want to continue that trend. If you have any comments, questions, or requests, let us know on our social media, Facebook, Reddit, YouTube. Let us know. We're happy to talk about it. And I think next time we'll figure out what our next episode will be about. We have a lot of options here, and we might go into some of the other side events in the modern poker era, like in 2011 heads-up championship with the grudge matches. There's some content there on Poker Go, but for now, tonight, I'll watch the Super High Roller Bowl to see if my boy Negreanu can pull it off.
Yep.
Any other words you want to say, Sam?
Yeah, I mean, we'll obviously follow the Robby Lew, Garrett Adelstein situation. I'm trying to follow the news the best I can, but I have a day job, so I can't exactly stay on top of it. I found out about this 15K thing with the employee 5 minutes before we started recording this episode. So if my thoughts seemed a little scattered, that's why. But yeah, we'll do our best to keep up with the latest developments as well as anything else in the poker world. If you're interested in sort of us presenting poker news and what our thoughts are on that, I'm happy to do that at the start of each episode or at the end, make it a regular segment. Or if you prefer sort of us covering more, back in the past, I don't want to say antiquated poker media, but older poker media, traditional poker media, we're happy to do that too. And also poker movies, poker TV shows, anything like that, any suggestions, as well as any interview requests. Ben and I won't be able to pay you, but you'll be able to come on here and you can plug your business or whatever else. Everybody go buy E-Dubs' soaps. Do that. I'll give it that.
Check out Novinsky's poker coaching services as well.
Yeah. But yeah, thank you for joining us in this episode. And we went to the Asia Pacific. We went to Europe. Where will we go next? That's for you to find out.
All right, guys. We'll see you next time. Take care.